Sorry. Sorry.
There we are. No worries. I'm easy. I'll simply take a little more time at the end. So, male head covering and the priestly lottery in the Bet HaMikdash. Hatzlas Kohanim in the Bet HaMikdash. Can you imagine that? A Kohen mit tabloids in a cup in the Bet HaMikdash. Schrecklich. So, let's see. Barishona, in the beginning, line 5, Kol mi shrotze litrom et hamizbeach torem. ובזמן שהן מרובין רצין ועולין בכבש, וכל הקודם את חברו בארבע אמות זכה. ואם היו שניהם שווים, הממונה אומר להם הצביעו. We're in the Bet HaMikdash. Kohanim, lots of Kohanim, 24 mishmarot, divisions of Kohanim, and there are jobs to be done. Many of these jobs have perks. Of course, we know that our God doesn't eat or drink what's brought into the temple. And what was offered up on the altar was either burnt or eaten by the Kohanim. The Kohanim not only get food, but they get hides and skins and all sorts of things. So if you were the Kohen in charge, you had a good job. So how do we divide the jobs amongst the Kohanim? Well, in the old days, it began with a bit of physical fitness. I'm sure the trainers, personal trainers, would love this. All the Kohanim are mustered at the bottom of the ramp going up to the large altar, and then on the starter's pistol going bang, they all start to run. And whoever gets there first within 4 cubits, well, he and his compatriots get to do the avodah that we're talking about. This avodah actually is removing the ash, so it's not such a dramatic and glorious avodah, but still avodah. All right, now what happened was that eventually, all the Kohanim, they started to train, so that there was no clear winner ever. All the Kohanim were very athletic, and they all made sure they would get to the top of the ramp at the same time. So then the Mamoneh, the Kohen in charge of giving up the jobs, would say Hatzbiu. Now we know the word Hatzba'ah or Latzbiah from elections, correct? But what's the root of Hatzba'ah? Etzba, not seva, white seva, etzba, finger. Yes. It goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says on line 7, Hatzbiu, hotziu etzbaotechem. Pull out your fingers. Kol echad, and this is not being rude, kol echad yareh etzbao. Every Kohen puts out a finger. In Mefaresh lekaman bepirkin. Now, we've all got these Kohanim with their fingers out. Why fingers? Because we don't account heads. We don't account heads, as you know. We get in trouble. Not going to go into that whole topic, whether it's Ein Hara or something else, but we recall that when King Saul wanted to count soldiers, what does it say? Vayif Gedem Babazek. He counted them using pottery shards. They held out a pottery shard. In other words, we don't account heads. Okay. So what happens? You get all the Kohanim, 30, 40, they're standing in a circle in this particular mishmeret, this particular cohort. What does the organizer do? He takes the hat.
That is the background that I have on the Zoom sheet. So you can't see that I'm at the rail station.
Good evening, Shmuley.
Good evening. Sorry, I'm in transit, so I can't read anything tonight.
Okay, good to see you. But you have a lot of very holy books, devotional literature in your background. But I understand it's fake, just like the news. Okay, so good to see you. Bernie too. Let's move on. So the guy in charge says, take off your hat. And one of the Kohanim takes off his mitznefed, his official hat. Umimenu payes matchilin limnot. Then the Kohen starts to count fingers from the hatless Kohen. Umotzi kol echad vechad etzbo leminyan, v'amumone omer, kol shaminyan kalebo hu zot. Now, how do we do the count? You have to have a count that's not going to be liable to corruption. I'm not sure I should mention the word corruption this evening. It's far too loaded. But if you have a hat and you put numbers in a hat and people put their hands in the hat, who knows? whether it's loaded, whether the guy holding the hat. So this is very transparent. Kohanim are standing in a circle. They all have their fingers out. One Kohen loses his hat. The director says, okay, I'm going to start to count. He takes a number much bigger than the number of Kohanim, 60 or 100, starts to count, and when he comes to the number 60, whichever Kohen it is, he stops. So he started from the one next to the hatless Kohen, okay? So this is the story, and that's how it works, and it says, V'chen l'chol ha'payasot. Rashi Yuma Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. That's how it's done every pious in the Bet HaMikdash. Nothing like seeing, okay, is believing a corruption-free lottery. Tosafot ask a question. The medieval Tosafot, we're now jumping from the Talmud to the Middle Ages, to our Tosfos. Haba'inan, line 12, Tema, the Kevan, Daba'inan Pais Bekodesh, Amailo Hayu Mafaisim Bazaratzma, the Kaddish Tfei. The Pais was done, by the way, 4 times a day because of all the various avodot. And it was done in the Azara. No, it's done in the Lishkat Hagazit. Lishkat Hagazit is the so-called hewn chamber where the Sanhedrin sat, not really part of the Bet HaMikdash. So Tosafot say why. The Gemara there talks about the fact that the Lishkat Hagazit was divided. One part was very holy, one part wasn't. This is the non-holy part. So if you're giving out the avodot to the Kohanim, surely this is part of the temple service. Do it at least in the Azara, which is holy, and just before they go in to do their avodot. V'omer Rabbeinu Tam, end of line 12, beginning of line 13, Kevan do not tell mitznafto shel echad mehen, since you're going to take a hat off a Kohen in the Bet HaMikdash, genai haya lamod belo mitznefet bazara. You can't be in a holy place if you're a male without a hat. Kal vachomer, if you are a Kohen in the Bet HaMikdash. I mean, it's unthinkable. Inconceivable. Okay? So Tosafot say that's how it was done in the Lishkat Hagazit. So at least we're not offending the sanctity of the Bet HaMikdash. There's an interesting Rambam. Rambam says that he describes the pious as I've just described it. And then he says, look at line 16. The hen omdin ba'kafa, they stand in a circle. V'amamone notel mitznefet me'al rosho shel echad mehen, takes the hat off to start the count, u'machazira, and puts it back. V'hu ha'ish shematchilin limenot mimenu, he's the guy from whom they start. The Rambam would seem to say that perhaps we are sensitive, even in the Bet HaMikdash, not to have a Kohen without a hat. But whether it's because he shouldn't have a hat, or because a Kohen shouldn't be in the Bet HaMikdash, mechusar begadim, without his full regalia, which is a capital offense, is not clear. But if you take it from the hat point of view, Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller, the Tosafot Yom Tov in the 16th century, looks at it from the Ashkenazi hatter's point of view. Kohen shouldn't be standing with no hat, so you have to put it back on straight away. So the Tiferet Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, takes the Tosafot Yom Tov up on this and says it doesn't make sense. לא זכיתי להבין, ואם מחזירו לאלתר, אם כן לא היה נטילת המצנפת סימן. רק ממי יתחילו למנות, אם כן למה לי נטילת המצנפת כלל? Tiferet Yisrael says the whole point of having the hatless Kohen is that you can keep track of where you started. Say you lose a number in the middle. He's counting until 460 or 100. He gets confused. Has to start again. Where do you start from? The Kohen who doesn't have a hat. So if he's going to put his hat back on immediately, what's the point in having him as the control for the counting? That's the gist of what the Tiferet Yisrael says. And if you look at that, he says in line 23, Ve'ika Rabbeinu Tosafot Yom Tov, if it's really like Rabbi Heller, okay, who introduced the teaching of Mishnah in Prague, it's the Maharal, it's a whole other lecture. Shema chaziro miyad barosho kashe, shema yishkechu gam zot mimin atala mitznefet, u'ma siman haya lehen az. Once you lose your hatless kohen, you have no control over the counting. Tosafot understood that it was a genai because you have a hatless kohen spending every single pice, every single lottery, his naked head in the Bet HaMikdash. משמע מדבריהם שכל זמן הפיס עומד בגילוי הראש, ואם לא כן, אין כאן גנאי ברגע קטנה. If it's only for a second, what's the point? So,
Can I just ask?
Yeah, sure.
The
Ask away.
mitnesset is
Mitznefet.
yes, mitznefet is not a generic hat. It's a specific hat for the
Yes,
Kohanim, if
a
I understand
Kohen's
it
hat,
correctly.
absolutely.
A mitre, or however you want to translate it.
Yeah, oh, not quite. We're getting a little a bishop-like there, but it's kind of a special priestly hat, yes.
So in which case the question has to be asked, are we talking about a specific hat only or a generic hat?
It doesn't matter. As far as Tosafot are concerned, it's the Gilui Rosh, it's the Gunai. It's disgraceful for a Kohen to be hatless, just like it's disgraceful for you to go into St. John's Wood when you're the Gabbai or the president and not have a hat on your head. Would you allow anyone in shul hatless, Brian?
I keep it for Purim only.
Okay, but without a yarmulke, a kippah?
Maybe not.
Exactly. So there we are. That is the point. I'm pitting the temple time, where there was no sensitivity apparently to a naked head, to our time, beginning in the Middle Ages. Tosafot Rabbeinu Tam is the 13th century. Tosafot Yom Tov is the 15th, is the 16th century. Yisrael Lifshitz is the 17th. They are Ashkenazi Jews who deal with the issue of the head covering. Brian, did you follow last week's lecture yet?
I did.
Okay. So you know that this developed. The Talmud is probably much less sensitive to the whole thing. So this
Right.
is an Ashkenazi thing. So let's see. So if this is all clear, this is really the punchline. I don't have a picture of this, but you have to believe me. So let's have someone read this. Brian, you can read to celebrate your question. Line 27.
The publishers of the 1999 illustrated Mishnayot, Machon HaMikdash, depict the Kohen whose mitznefet is removed as wearing a large white kippah underneath.
With a pom-pom on. In other words, what we have is another anachronism. It's impossible for anybody in Israel or America in the Orthodox world to understand. Anybody who would be printing an illustrated Mishnayot for kids, okay, or young people, how you can have a Kohen in the Bet HaMikdash with nothing on his head? So they've added a nice big white kippah in Breslover style underneath the mitznefet. Now we're all set. We could go into the mirror and we'd be fine. But there is a problem here because I'm reading from the Rambam's code. If you are a Kohen Jean and you turn up without your full costume, it's your chayav mita. Uchusar begadim chayav mita, liable death by heaven. Kach heter, kach hayater begadim. If you add, you're also chayav mita b'nei shamayim. כגון שלבש שתי כותנות או שני אבנתים, או כהן הדיוט שלבש בגדי כהן גדול ועבד, הרי זה מחלל העבודה וחייב מיתה בידי שמיים. So the editors, the publishers of the 1999 illustrated Mishnayot are encouraging Kohanim, if there was to be a Bet HaMikdash, to risk death at the hands of heaven because they put on a big white kippah underneath their mitznefet. But you cannot stop the steamroller of Haredi progress. And in 2002, there's a book published by Eliyahu David HaKohen, Reichman in Jerusalem, Kisui HaRosh Kehalacha V'Kippah Kehalacha. You've many pages of the halachot of when you have your head covered, when you don't, the dimensions of a kippah, the material from which the kippah must be made. You need a hat and a kippah. Okay, we've seen the ongoing process of the halachitization of Jewish life. Now, that's the first half. The other half, I've called male head covering as a folk-generated indispensable symbol of Jewishness. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it's quite simple. It means that we as the Jewish people have given birth to an idea that a male covering his head is indispensable. You cannot do without it, a symbol of Jewishness. And God forbid that a male would consciously walk around with an uncovered head, okay? Certainly not in the shtetl, certainly not when East European Jewish life was flourishing. We know what happened in the land of the Yekkes because we read Rabbi Hoffman's tshuva last week, and we know what Rabbi Hirsch did, okay, in his school. But as far as the shtetl is concerned, it would be capital offense to take off your yarmulke or your hat or your kapeluch or whatever. And whilst there are theories as to when this came about or how this came about, I haven't found any of the historians to be very convincing here. Whether it was non-Jewish pressure that we turned into a virtue or whether it was a kind of event that happened at some stage, nothing seems to me to be very convincing as a one-time event. And I prefer to see this as a mark of Jewish identity that has nothing to do with halakha at all, but is accepted by the Jewish people as being really important for the preservation of the Jews and for Jewish continuity. And that's why I started this section off with a Midrash Lekach Tov Pesikta Zutrata on Parashat Va'er. V'otzeiti etchem, v'tzalti etchem, galti etchem, v'lakachti etchem. God says when he brings the Israelites out of Egypt, I did 4 things. I took you out, I saved you, I redeemed you, and I have taken you to the promised land. Keneged arba zchuyot shebiyadam. These 4 expressions are because of 4 things that the Israelites did in Egypt. Shalosh shinu et lashonam. They didn't change their language, they continued speaking Hebrew. V'lo heklifu et simlotam. And they didn't change their clothing. They wore the same clothing that Jews had always wore, and they were happy to be identified as Jews. V'lo gilu et sodam. That's an interesting phrase. I'm going to leave that for a second, but they didn't really explain the entire truth of Judaism. V'lo bitlu brit milah, and they didn't stop being circumcised, which should have been an easy way not to be identified as a Jew. We know that from the Nazis and how they identified Jews left, right, and center. Israel became a nation because they were identified by these extra halachic signs, outward signs, or modes of conduct. Nothing to do with halakha, but very important. They made sure they were different in what they wore, what they ate, how they spoke. That made the difference.
But in Egypt, they didn't make circumcision. Yehoshua begins that the people went and they were not circumcised.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we have a lot of answers for that. It said the law bitlu. In other words, they knew that they needed to do Brit Milah. They didn't nullify and say no more Brit Milah in the Jewish religion. They simply said, we are not going to do it, or it's too difficult for us, or we can't get it organized, whatever it is. And also, of course, when Yehoshua did a mass circumcision, that could have been on the generation that left Egypt. This is 40 years later. Many children were born. In other words, Yotzei Mitzrayim were already circumcised. But those who were brought up in the wilderness were not. And no Brit Milah was done in the wilderness. You ask me why? I'll give you the Gemara, which you know well. The winds are blowing in the wrong direction. Brian, it's unhealthy when you're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years to be circumcised. Apparently, it's not good for healing. So don't do it. That is the way the Gemara goes about explaining this, okay? So I think that's enough. And now I'm going to take you in a direction you might find very unexpected. Keeping one's head covered is to die for. The battle of the printing presses, Slavuta versus Vilna. Or if I was a Galiciana, and it is a Galician town, I should say Slavita against Vilna. Correct, Jean?
Mm-hmm.
Slavita. Okay, so let's see what happened. I will stay with the English speakers for the time being. I thought I saw Bernie. Bernie,
Yeah, I seem to be here.
good. So, let's go. Line 8 in 1792.
In 1792, Rav Moshe Shapira, son of Rav Pinchas Shapira of Cortez,
No, Koretz.
Koretz.
Yeah, you're
Now-
getting confused with the Spaniards and the New World. No, we are in Poland. Koretz.
Okay.
Yeah.
A charismatic Hasidic master and a member of the Best Inner Cycle, established
About circle.
Inner Circle, established a printing press in Slavuta, Western Ukraine.
Okay, so who is Reb Pinchas Shapira of Koretz? Anybody would like to tell us about him?
A
Jean.
big Rebbe.
A big Rebbe. How
Yes.
big? Okay, he was a Talmud. He was actually brought up, as they all were, as a misnagid. He was very good at his Talmudic learning, as they all were. He came from Shklov, actually, which is not far away from Vilna, and Shklov was the seat of a lot of misnagdim. But he wandered a bit and became a chosid. He joined the circle of the Besht, and he lived in Koretz, which was famous for its printing press. Now, when the Besht passed away, the leadership passed over to the Maggid of Mezerich. Now, the Maggid of Mezerich put a lot of emphasis on external things. The Rebbe, having a very wealthy and rich place to spread his word, a lot of singing, dancing, gesturing, and prayer. Reb Pinchas Shapira of Koretz was the opposite. He said, I'm interested in inner feeling and spirituality. And he basically left Mezhibozh, where the Besht had lived and where the Maggid set up his court. And he went off to Koretz. He had many disciples, but he did not have the same influence on the Hasidic movement as the Maggid of Mezerich did. But he is a descendant of the famous Shapira family. Now, Bernie, will you give us a little more on line 10? The Shapira family.
The Shapira family traced its ancestry to Rav Natan Nota Shapira, 1584 to 1633, rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva in Krakow, who claimed descent from Rashi.
As many did. He was also
a famous Kabbalist and author of a commentary on the Zohar and Megillah Amukot,
Megaleh Amukot, who reveals the deep secrets.
a mystical commentary on the Torah.
Okay, so a little about the Shapira ancestor. Reb Nosson Nota, he was extremely learned. But he was in the Polish style. He was a pupilist, and he also claimed to have been visited personally by Eliyahu Hanavi.
Oh.
He taught in the week Halakha, Gemara, but on Shabbatot he gave drashot which were widely attended on Kabbalah. He loved gematria, names, and his drashot were filled to capacity, standing room only. He wrote Megaleh Amukot, which has 1,000 perushim on the Aleph of Vayikra. The Aleph of Vayikra is a small Aleph. He has 1,000 commentary on that. 232 perushim on Moses' last prayer, Ebrana. You get the idea, okay? Genius. And famous for his Kabbalah, but also famous for his Talmud and his Pilpul. He had 10 children. 10 children, and they all married and had children. So let's count his descendants. Avi, would you give us a list of Reb Nosson Nota's descendants? Line 13, amongst Rabbi Nathan Notta's other descendants.
Amongst Nata's other descendants were Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, Rabbi Chaim Halberstam of Sanz,
The Divrei Chaim.
Shapiro.
And Rabbi Meir Shapira.
Meir Shapira, head of Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, and founder of the Daf Yomi.
So his son, Rabbi Moshe Shapira, we're coming back to the son of Reb Pinchas Shapira of Koritz, who was, of course, another descendant of Reb Nosson. Right? Avi, Reb Moshe.
Reb Moshe Shapiro refused to earn his living from the rabbinate and chose to invest in a printing press in Slavuta, which specialized in Hasidic works and in the production of a particularly aesthetic edition of the Talmud.
The Slavuta Shas, if you can get hell of it, is the most beautiful Shas ever printed. Absolutely stunning. Now, Reb Pinchas of Koritz emphasized inner spirituality and ethics. So his son, firstborn son, Reb Moshe, refused to earn a living. He didn't want to be an Admor Hasidi who's supported by all the money from the Hasidim and the pigeons and all of that. He said, no, I'm going to earn my living as a printer. And he became a printer in Slavuta. The Shas they published is a gorgeous Shas, but they only published three editions. His two sons.
Where'd it go? His two sons, Rav Shmuel and Rav Pinchas, eventually took over the running of the press.
Okay, thank you, Avi. Michael, you're next.
Yes, Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, didn't he be very positive for the Agunot? I think I heard something, no?
I'm not sure about that. And let's leave that with Sarich Iyun. I'll get back to you next week. He's not famous for halachic work, and he left very little written. So it may be someone else, Jean, but I will check, okay? Let's hear from Michael Gillis on line 19. The first
Slavuta Shas was printed in 1807, and according to the custom of the time, the Shapiras received rabbinic approval in the form of a ban, cherem, upholding their right to 25 years of freedom from competition. Amongst the mainly Hasidic rabbis who signed onto this ban was Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi,
who is famous as being the first Rebbe of which Hasidut?
Chabad.
Chabad, Lubavitch. Okay. Only three
editions of the Slavuta Talmud were produced. The last one in 1813. In 1834, the Rom family of Vilna.
Now we're getting to your Landsmannschaft, okay, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, print of
the Achim, the Almona and the Achim Rom.
The Almona and the Achim Rom, and Achaman Rom and Dvoira Rom and the Achim, yeah.
In 1834, the Rom family of Vilna printed a Shas arguing that 27 years had passed since the first Slavuta Talmud, and therefore the ban no longer applied. The Shapiras argued that only 21 years had elapsed since their third edition, and they were therefore entitled to 3 more years of freedom from competition.
So here we learn about a copyright concept that preceded the Act of Queen Anne in English law in 1706, which introduced copyright. We're talking about something that goes back long before Slavuta and Vilna. The cherem, the idea that you had to protect Jewish literary works. We remember the fact that Jews were literary long before Christians were. In the Middle Ages, we read how a disciple of Thomas Aquinas said the Christians need to be ashamed because they never teach their sons to read and write unless they're going to be priests or lawyers, and the Jews put up money so that every boy and girl can read God's law and be spiritually literate. So the idea of preventing work being copied when they were copying manuscripts and when it came into the world of printing, that too goes back a long time. And of course, the cardinal idea was that you gave a printer or a copyist so many years to sell their works. This is the whole idea, to encourage people, because if they're going to copy or print a book and the competition is going to be allowed within a short time to produce something that perhaps is a little better, then nobody's going to go into the publishing business. So this came to a head in the Slavuta versus Vilna Shas. Now the 25 years was the one was put in to the Slavuta Shas. Then they argued about when the 25 years is going to come to an end. So who is next in the English line? Ian Taylor.
Which line are we? 25?
Line 26. The dispute became one.
Thank you for noticing I arrived. The dispute became one between Hasidim and Mitnagdim, with the former siding with the Shapiras and the latter supporting the Rom.
Wouldn't you guess? Okay, so the Hasidim went with Slavuta and the Mitnagdim went with Rom, and now the battle lines are drawn. Rabbis come from all over. Those who argue in favor of Rom are from Lithuania and Russia. Those arguing in favor of Slavuta are from Poland, but the point is that some of the greatest halachis of the time actually sided with Rom for halachic reasons. Ian, give us another line or two, please. Rabbi Akiva Eger.
His son Rav Solomon Eger and his son-in-law, the Hatam Sofer, also ruled in favor of the Roms, arguing that it was not years per se that underpinned the ban, but the concern that if their books remained unsold, printers of Jewish books would no longer continue to print.
So this is the practical solution. Hence, if the
Roms agreed to buy out all remaining copies of the Slavuta Shas, they were free to market their Vilna Shas.
In other words, the Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Akiva Eger, by the way, was miffed. I happen to know this because of the tshuva he wrote. He was miffed by the fact that the Slavuta defenders wrote in their tshuva that Rabbi Akiva Eger agreed with them when he never had. He consulted him, but he'd never come to a decision. So he got rather miffed by the fact, and he was a very modest man, but he got on his high horse here and said, you have misquoted me, you've taken me out of context, you've used me to further your cause, now I'm going to show you. And he said basically no to Slavuta and yes to Vilna. So the point here, and the Chatam Sofer develops this idea very beautifully in a long tshuva, is that what's the point? The point is to make sure that your printer doesn't lose out. So if you buy up all the remaining copies, then you can start the competition afresh. You don't need to go exactly for the number of years. What's more important? Is it purposive interpretation? Why you have a ban at all, in other words, to make sure that the printer can recoup? Or is it the form, the number of years that's important? So the Chassam Sofer and the Egers said it's not the number of years. So we apply that in law in different areas when we want to get people to give up having the building named after them. If they gave money a long time ago, there's not that much money left, and they say, well, you know, let's buy out the old donor, take his or her name off the building, and the new rich donor is given a lot more, but he has to pay up to compensate the old donor. I mean, this is a type of solution. And this, in fact, is exactly what happened here. And RJZEOP, I don't know who that is at this time, but let's go back to the top and we'll have a last section read. Michael Gillis, please. Line 32, a Zabla
din Torah was eventually heard in Grodno, Belarus.
Horodno is how you say it in Belarusian. Horodno is how you say it in Yiddish. Okay.
Yeah.
And the
decision was in favor of the Roms, provided that they agreed to buy out the remaining Slavuta Talmuds, which they did.
So what's all this got to do with males covering their heads and giving up their lives? Now we get to something very interesting. Michael, give us a little more Glasgow brogue, please. 36.
Okay, the competition between the two presses would have continued, but Slavuta was closed by the Russian authorities in 1836 against the background of Eliezer Protogin's suicide and the show trial of Rav Shmuel and Rav Pinchas Shapira,
who were the sons of Rav Moshe, who were in charge of the press at the time. Now, what's the story here? So, Protogin.
Protogin worked in the press as a bookbinder. His domestic life was very unhappy, and he began to drink heavily. He was fired and eventually hung himself in the press.
So, you came to the press in the morning, and here was this bookbinder hanging from the rafters. Clearly a suicide. But, Ian, can you please take up the theme? You're next on my screen. Line 3, his distraught family.
Yes, I'm following. His distraught family accused the Shapiro brothers of having killed him because he was going to inform on them to the Russian police regarding books they were printing without the approval of the censor. A local fanatical Orthodox priest used the episode to convince the police that was clearly a suicide was in fact that what was clearly a suicide, was in fact an execution of a Moser.
Moiser.
A Moser.
Moser.
Yeah, by the Shapiras. So this is the story, okay? You find this Jewish bookbinder hanging in the press. It's a suicide. And it clearly, and you will see how it was definitely a suicide. But the family said, oh, they killed him. They killed him. They refused to accept that because if you're a suicide, you get buried in holy ground in the shtetl. No, you don't. And they were very upset, and they blamed the Shapiro brothers because they say they brought him because they fired him. That's why he committed suicide. And then a local Orthodox Russian priest says, I have an opportunity here. You know why the Shapiro brothers killed and made it look like a suicide? Because he was going to tell us, good Russians, that the Jews in Slavuta press were printing books that hadn't received the approval of the Christian censor. So he became a Moser. He's going to inform on the Jewish community, make them subject to non-Jewish retribution, and you can kill a Moser.
Kol HaKodem Zacha.
Kol HaKodem Zacha. Thank you, Jean. So there we are. Now, all this gets very fraught indeed. So, 13, who's next on my screen? Avi, please.
You were 7. We didn't read 7 yet.
You finished 7. Thank you, Ian. We'll get back to you, though. The Tsarist authorities.
The Tsarist authority, I'm sorry.
Yes, sure. Line 7.
The Tsarist authorities held the brothers in solitary confinement for 3 years while they investigated the crime.
They weren't in a rush to, as in the civil system. Once you are suspected, they throw you into solitary confinement, and then they investigate. Doesn't matter how many years you languish in solitary. So the brothers are already 3 years in solitary confinement. Then
the Russian Jewish historian Saul Moisevich Ginsburg,
who ended up in New York, but he was a Fabrenta communist at the time. Gained access
to the Tsarist police records after the Russian Revolution and published a full account of the proceedings, which proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the police, at the behest of the priest, used the tragedy to further their persecution of Jewish life in Russia, and in particular to attempt to bring about the closure of all Jewish printing presses in the country. The drama of
you can read the book, The Drama of Slavuta, translated by Blombaum, University Press of America, 1991. So what happened then? Jack, can you please give us 14 at the end of 3 years?
14. At the end of 3 years, a verdict against the brothers was issued, and they were condemned to undergo
Skovstroy. How's your Russian?
Gauntlet.
Running the gauntlet. Now, or in German?
Gassenlauf in German, followed by deportation to Siberia. This military punishment consisted of
line 16, marching.
This consists of marching the condemned man who had been stripped to the waist between 2 columns of soldiers, each armed with a thick wooden truncheon, and receiving blows from each side by each soldier. Many of the condemned did not survive the punishment. Ginsburg records the legend that when
Line 19, when Reb Pinchas
Rabbi Pinchas was being marched through the ranks of Cossack soldiers, his yarmulke fell off, and at that point he stopped and did not move on until it was replaced on his head. This cost him several additional blows, which he bore in order not to remain with the uncovered head. Shapiro was willing to risk death rather than go bareheaded.
Okay, I'm not going to get very lurid about this, but the Gassen Laufen or the Preiti Skovstroi was used earlier on. In fact, there's something in Rome that was very similar. It was a military punishment. If you disgraced your unit, they lined up as many as 150 soldiers, 2 rows, and you had to walk through, stripped to the waist, and they bashed you, and blood would flow. If you survived, sometimes they'd send you back 3 times. And each time, every soldier would land a blow. Many did not survive this. So the brothers were found guilty, and they were sentenced to both the gauntlet, and that's where we get this idea of running the gauntlet. The gauntlet was thrown down, and that was when the march began, or there was a gauntlet to keep the condemned moving, and it was pretty horrible at the time. And we have a record, okay? And it's quite clear from Ginsburg's research that the Russian police deliberately went about finding them guilty and imposed the punishments because they wanted to close. This is part of Nicholas I's anti-Jewish campaign. Destroy Jewish culture in Holy Mother Russia and anything cultural. So here we can get the printing presses. So if there's no more Jewish books, there's no more Jewish literacy, there's no more Jewish life. So this was a show trial, but at the pinnacle of this is the fact that Reb Pinchas Shapira refused to move on until the soldiers replaced the yarmulke on his head. And this cost him many more blows because it happened again and again, and each time, they knocked off his yarmulke for fun, and they put it back when he refused to move. So he was willing to risk death. Okay, Yonat, would you like to read from line 23, the effects of the beating?
The effects of the beating on the brothers' health were so severe that they could not be sent to Siberia, so they were kept under harsh house arrest in Moscow until
by the way, until 1855, sorry,
1855, following the death of Tsar Nicholas I and the accession of Alexander II.
Alexander II was much kinder to the Jews. Unfortunately, he was assassinated, and we know what happened after that. But actually, the Hasidim paid a huge amount of money in bribes to stop them being sent to Siberia. They were in terrible shape. After they'd run the gauntlet, they were in terrible shape. And then for 19 years, they were kept under harsh house arrest in Moscow. They were then pardoned, okay?
Well, they were then pardoned and permitted to return to the Pale of settlement. The Russian allowed 2 presses to stay open in Vilna and Zhytomyr. Yeah. And in 1874, the Shapira brothers' sons eventually leased the Zhytomyr one and continued the Salvuta tradition of printing Kabbalah and Hasidut.
Okay, so now we're getting to the head covering issue. Okay, this was an act of Misirut Nefesh. Okay, Pinchas refused to move on. And this becomes a theme. Is there anybody to my left?
Yeah.
of which story that you know well, this is the story of the three gifts. Now we're going to just move on to Yitzchak Leibush Peretz. Anybody heard of him? And would you like to tell me a little about him?
He was a great Hebrew writer and Yiddish writer.
Okay, I'd put the Yiddish before the Hebrew. Many of his Hebrew works were translations of his Yiddish works into Hebrew, which he did. He was one of the great
classical Yiddish.
Yiddish
writers.
And
together
Shalom
with
Aleichem.
Mendel Sforim and Shalom
Aleichem.
Yitzchak Leibush Peretz, okay? So let's just have a look at him, and then I'm going to tell you the story, and we're going to say a couple of things. So, we are here, and I'm going to get you, Bernie, to read, please, Isaac Leib Peretz, line 30. Unmute.
Yitzchak Leib Peretz.
Yeah. Bernie, you have to unmute.
I lost the text. Okay, I'm back.
30. Isaac Leib Peretz.
Was one of the three.
Are you here?
Isaac Leib Peretz, May 18th, 1852 through April 13, 1915, was one of the three great classical Yiddish writers along with Mendel Sforim and Shalom Aleichem. He conceived of Jewish literature as grounded in Jewish traditions and Jewish history, and as the expression of Jewish ideals. Unlike many other masculine, he greatly respected Hasidic Jews for their sincere piety rather than empty religiosity.
Whether they're still that way is a different story. The story was inspired
by the Shapira's brothers episode.
That's interesting. There's a real historical background to this story. A few words about Peretz, and then I'll tell you the story. And I have a couple of things to say. And then we will say a few more things. Peretz was born in Zamość in southeast Poland. As a child, he was an Ilwi, Talmudical genius, as they often were, but he taught himself Russian, Polish, German, and French, and he read literature widely. There were a lot of maskilim in Zamość, so he went to university, and he became a lawyer, practiced law in Zamość until the Tsarist authorities cancelled his license because he was a socialist, and he preached socialism. So he left Zamość and he went to Warsaw, and he worked actually for his whole working life. He was in the cemetery department, the Bet HaKvarot department of the Vad HaKihila. That's how he earned his bread. But his house became a magnet for literary talents in Yiddish, Hebrew, and other languages too. He was part Bundist and part Zionist. Very unusual, and also a great believer in what he regarded as the inner spirituality of Hasidic Jewish culture at its best. Amongst the people who came to his home in Warsaw were Bialik, Klausner, Fichman, Schneier, Dinsen, Naumburg, and Berkowitz. He also published a lot of Yiddish socialist ideology, and he included his stories in there, okay? And died of a heart attack at his writing desk in 1915. What's the story of the three gifts? Now, the translation is by him. It's a beautiful translation. I haven't included it all. We're certainly not going to read the entire translation at the end. I am going to focus on a couple of lines. But I'll tell you, I will tell you what happened in this story. A story is, in the shtetl, somebody dies. The soul goes up to heaven. And there's a court. Bet Din Shel Mala, the heavenly court. And what does the heavenly court have? In the middle, there's a big scale. So when the soul comes up, the head of the court says, bring on the good deeds. And the white angel emerges and has a beautifully white sack, and out of the sack come beautiful mitzvot, and they're loaded onto one pan of the scale. And everybody in the heavens is shouting and cheering. Then out from the left side, of course, comes a black angel, horribly black, with a horribly black bag, and out of the bag come horribly black averas, and they're put into the other scale, the pan of the scale. And heaven is quiet. They sob and they cry when they see so many averas. The soul says, wow, I didn't think I was committing so many sins. But there we are. You never know what you're doing in life until you get to the next world, and then you realize. So the head of the court says to the shamas, who is also the angel, says, measure. And the shamas peers in at the scales, and he looks and he looks, and he looks and he looks, and the head of the court says, no, gonna move on. More mitzvot or more averot. Is it going to Gan Eden because there are more mitzvot, or is it going to Gehenna because there are more averot? Shamash said it's never happened. The scale is exactly even. 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 What are we going to do? The Bet Din has the problem. So it issues eventually, after much discussion, the angels and the head of the court say, look, we can't send the soul to heaven because it hasn't got more mitzvot. Can't send the soul to hell because it doesn't have more averot. Soul, go away and never come back. Leave heaven and just do nothing. That's it. You've had your chips, as it were. The soul is very unhappy. Now, the shamas who escorts the soul out of heaven and back into the atmosphere feels strongly. He's very upset, and he says, look, soul, I know that this limbo is worse than anything else. And that's what the soul said. You know, I don't mind going to hell. At least I know where I'm going. For all eternity, I'm going to be just fluttering around. And then the angel says, look, and I'm going to bring you to line 28 on page 4. Let's go to line 28 on page 4. What does the shamas say, the angel? The tzadikei dorcha, now the righteous of your generation, who are sitting in heaven, right? They're all up in heaven because they did the right thing and they had no problem. Eile shemikarov bao, but they knew, the new righteous, which is an interesting phrase. In other words, there's a dark side to Peretz as well when you read the story carefully. Bao emet nitna lehamer. And we have to tell the truth. In other words, he has some reservations, but the new tzadikei ador, be'einayim pekuchot, we have to, where have I gone?
You jumped line.
Line 28, yes. Ohavim matanot. They like gifts. Now, this, of course, is what we call in French ashtoch. In other words, he's saying, you know, we have these newfangled tzaddikim in heaven. They're sitting around enjoying Gan Eden, but they like gifts. Is this a criticism of the Hasidic rabbis who are taking gifts, the pidionot? Or even the Misnagdim, large gifts on Rosh Hashanah, on Purim, who knows? So he says, look, because they like presents, bring them gifts. If you can bring 3 wonderful gifts of spiritual value, they might intercede and let you into heaven. That's the only thing you can do. So off the soul goes. The soul flies around and it can't find anything. And I want you to look at the line as well. Line 38 on the same page. Okay? Right, let's see, says the soul. I want to look amongst Jews to see if there's a really precious gift I can bring. What gift can I bring to heaven? A Jew sacrifices his life for the sake of God. That's a heavenly gift. Achrashav, but the soul can't find one. Itim nishtanu, the same phrase. Times have changed. Once upon a time, Amalekite Zeiten, Jews were indeed doing acts of Kiddush Hashem. But today, Zmanim nitchalfu. Yovel acharei yovel avar. One season passes another. Arim nechrashu vayu lesadot. Cities fall and become fields. Nichrutu ya'arot v'nivnu moshavot. They take down forests and they build housing, luxury dwellings. Slaim al sfat hayam nitotzu. This is Peretz. Of course, he's got a beautiful Yiddish and a beautiful Hebrew. The rocks, the stones on the seashore, they're blasted. Va'avneihem nishchaku va'ayu la'avak. Rivavot kochavim naflu mimromim. Thousands, tens of thousands of stars fall. Rivavot nishamot ayefot alu lamarot. 10,000s of tired souls go up. Ve'en davar. En yotzei min haklal. Nobody's doing anything special anymore.
read.
And chayim aniyim kol kach. Haneshamot kol kach beinoniot va'afurot. Souls, people, Jews, Yidden, are so average and so grey. Va'adam sach v'shafel en masim na'alim v'yafim nidcha ani la'olam. I'm going to be wandering around in limbo forever. But as the soul says this, she's attracted by a scene. The scene involves a Jew whose house is being robbed by Russian peasants. And they raid everything, tear apart the whole house, take the jewels and the money. Then there's a little box they discover under the bed. They take it out. All this time, as you'll read, the Jew is silent. He says, God gave and God took, no matter. But when they take the little box and want to break it open, he opens his mouth, says no, stretches out his hand, and they immediately kill him. They say, we found the ultimate treasure. And when they open it, what do they find? Dust. Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Earth from Eretz Israel that the rich Jew planned to be buried in. And that was the only possession he was prepared to fight for. And the soul dives down, takes some of the dust mixed with the blood of this Jew, takes it up to heaven, and the first gift is accepted. Then the same thing. The soul wanders around, can't find anything exceptional until, again, its attention is attracted. But Peretz spends a long time on the fact that the Jews are not doing anything special. Nothing is really sincere. It's all on the surface. But then there is a girl who's being tried by the alderman of the town. What happened? It was Easter, and she was found outside the ghetto on the streets. And they said immediately, the girl, a Jewish girl, is Satan. She's come to tempt young Christian men. She's blaspheming the host, that is the statues they were carrying, the host that they place in the mouths of the Catholics. She has to be put to death. And how is she going to be put to death? We tie her to that tails of horses. We whip the horses, and they will drag her through the streets of the town. What does she ask for when she's given a last request? She wants some sharp pins. They laugh and say, "What, sharp pins?" "That's what I want," she says. And what does she do? Unbeknownst, as the crowd roars and waits for the blood bath to begin, she sticks her dress down into the flesh of her legs so that they shouldn't be exposed when she's dragged through the streets by the wild horses. The soul dives down and it picks up one of these blood-stained pins, takes it up to heaven. This is the second gift. The third gift is our case of Reb Pinchas Shapira. The soul sees a Jew being led on between a gauntlet, okay, and the gauntlet and the beating. The gauntlet, that is the Gasselaufen, okay, between the two rows of soldiers who are beating, as in the case of Reb Pinchas Shapira. So Peretz took the story of Reb Pinchas Shapira, puts it into his famous story of the three gifts. And this is the last gift. The third gift is the yarmulke, okay? Each time the Jew stops, and he won't move until the yarmulke is put back on his head. And he dies. And the soul takes the blood-stained kippah or yarmulke, takes it up to heaven, and the third gift. Let's just read the last few lines of this. Of the story, and that is okay. Line 17. והקורבן נדחף לבין השורות. Okay, Michael from Switzerland. Are you happy to read?
Yeah.
I will try.
No, Michael from Switzerland. Michael from Switzerland, not from Russia.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
Bring the Switzerland.
והקורבן נדחף לבין השורות, והנה הוא הולך בין השוטים המכים ואינו נופל, הולך ואינו כושל, השוטים מצליפים, והוא הולך כצל מזות. הייתכן?
מה זאת? How come? He's still walking. He's been beaten and beaten and he's still walking. הייתכן, is it possible? Michael, ומתמלאים.
והמתמלאים החיילים, המה עוד לא הולך?
Who was וימלא חמה? Angry. Haman. ימלא המן חמה.
ולהכיסם הוא אומר?
Is he doing this just to
make them angry, to make them angry.
Yeah.
והשוטים שוקרים באוויר, מצליפים ולופתים את הבשר כנחשים, וסילוני דם ניתנים ופורצים, והוא הולך, עודנו הולך.
This is of course a poet. I mean, Peretz is a poet, he's a literary man, but you can feel it almost. The sound of the whip slicing the air, the fountains of blood coming out, okay? And he's still walking, he's still walking.
Where are you?
We are line 21.
אך אחרי רגעים מספר הרגיש בעבידתו ועמד כאילו
Something's missing. Something's missing. What is missing?
נמלך בדעתו והחליט יהיה מה ולא ילך בגילוי הראש.
His yarmulke has fallen off. He's not going to continue.
והוא שב על עקביו וניגש על
ההתרמולקה. He goes back. He's already there, but he goes back to pick up his kippah.
מרים אותה ומכסה את ראשו ופונה והולך. וככה הוא הולך והירמולקה בראשו עד אשר נפל.
Then he falls and dies. This didn't happen to Reb Pinchas, but Peretz is writing a story. And so he dies because he walked back. ותרד הנשמה
הנידחת אל הנופל ותחטוף מן הירמולקה חוט אחד רבע דם ומוקה ותאפלה.
One thread of the yarmulke with the blood of the Jew.
המתנה השלישית נתקבלה, הנשמה תגאל בגן עדן רבה השמחה.
So the soul is able to get the tzaddikim to intercede, and he's welcomed into Gan Eden.
יפות הן המתנות האיורים והתומים מוסיף.
That's the recorder of the heavenly court.
והעיקר שאינן להשמיש כלל, אלא לנו בלבד כדי למיהוי.
As it should be. Now this is a very important line. The Urim and Tumim, okay, the recorder of the heavenly court says, these gifts are not worth anything. Nobody's going to pay for them in this world. But they are only for noi, for beauty. They are indications of the beauty of the human soul. ki debayla meheve, as it ought to be. So what is Peretz leaving us with here? Is he saying, this is the true spirit of Judaism, the ability to give up your life, not for a din, not for a halakha. I'm going to stop the share. It's not a din or a halakha here, not chilul Shabbat, not eating on Yom Kippur. Something that goes much deeper. The continuity of the Jewish people, the idea that something about keeping your head covered makes you into a Jew. But is this useful at all? Remember, he's speaking at the time, socialism and Zionism. The Jews of Eastern Europe are persecuted. They are harried from pillar to post. What is the solution? Is it to be the noble souls in the ghetto who know how to die but do not know how to fight? Or should we perhaps go for something that is a little more useful and might help ameliorate our situation? So Peretz, by the way, all his stories often are on this type of dichotomy. He has a famous story about a Jew who's well respected in this world, okay? Does everything right, looks to be the perfect Jew. And there's some Jew who doesn't come to daven, who forgets, who doesn't always remember to eat, separate his milchig and his fleischig. And the first Jew is given a huge, important levaya. The second one, nothing. When they get to the heavenly court, it turns out that the one who wasn't so makpid helped people, and he is going to get to Gan Eden. The one who looks outwardly as if he's a real tzaddik, inside is as black as anything, has been cruel and dishonest, and he gets sent down to Gan Eden. But then, of course, Peretz has a twist, because the one who is sent to Gan Eden, who's given the opportunity, says, I'm not sure I want to go there. So what does that mean? And his famous story, Bonsha di Schweig. Is anybody familiar with Bonsha di Schweig?
Yes. Bonsha the silent.
Again, he's given the opportunity to go to Gan Eden by the heavenly court. But all he wants is a freshly buttered roll and a nice hot cup of coffee. So Peretz is much deeper, I think, and more critical. There is a dark side to these stories. They celebrate the authenticity of life in the shtetl, but there's a lot more going on. So I thought that this would be a good way of completing our discussion of the Marshal, Siman Ein Bet, as to the halachic significance of male head covering. Sorry, the voice on my left says what?
I said bedtime stories, gory bedtime stories.
Gory bedtime stories is what I'm told on my left, but I think this is an appropriate way to complete our shiurim on the Marshal's tshuva. Head covering, halachically speaking, is something that really is very thinly based. But in terms of the way Jews at certain times in our history thought about it and took it as seriously as death itself, says something about the need to have more than simply the letter of the law, but something about the living spirit. But of course, how far you should take that is, of course, always the question. And we have to try and keep to the midpoint and not go to either extreme. So I leave you to ponder upon Peretz. Anything you can read by him, I think, is just a beautiful read, whether you're more familiar in Yiddish or in Hebrew, and in English too. There are English translations of his works. Really is quite a wonderful read. And I hope that you've enjoyed the fact, for those who do know the three gifts, that there is a historical basis. And as all great writers do, you take something that actually happened or you've experienced and you make it into a literary work. So that's it for this evening. Next week, we'll continue with the Marshal. I think we're going to talk about the way in which the school of the Marshal, which goes down through the Gaon of Vilna to the Litvish Misnagdish view of halacha, as it used to be, in relation to Kabbalistic actions, usages, customs, and whether we are bound and how much we should feel bound. And again, we're always at the sort of the pivotal point between folk belief and enthusiasm and the letter of the law. So I will wish everybody a very good evening, a bonsoir, a gute Nacht, erev tov, laila tov, and sleep well, notwithstanding our story, okay? All right, that's it.
We take our hats off to you.